Hello, my name is Jill Hagan. I'm the Communications Director at the Women's Fund. We are currently hiring a new policy director, so I'm so pleased to be joined by these great advocacy partners today on the call. This is our first Public Policy Power Hour of the 2022 legislative session. As I said, bill introduction was complete yesterday, so today we're going to talk about the bills that have been introduced and how you can advocate. These partners today on the call, as we talk about access to reproductive health care and reproductive justice, know that at the Women's Fund, we trust people to make decisions around their own lives and specifically their reproductive health care. Abortion can be an emotionally charged topic for many reasons. However, the Women's Fund is rooted in a value of bodily autonomy, meaning it's not our place to make decisions for someone else when it comes to their bodies and their health. So the conversation today will be rooted in these values. I want to be very clear. If you came to debate abortion access or people's ability to seek the health care they need, this is not the space for you. Questions that are rooted in opposition to these stated values will not be elevated to the group. Let's get to it. Today's speakers are from ACLU of Nebraska, Scout Richters, Ashley Spivey, the director of IB Black Girl, Andy Curry-Grubb, State Executive Director of Planned Parenthood, and I'm going to turn it over to these lovely people to discuss reproductive access in Nebraska. Ashley.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you to the Women's Fund for hosting yet another important space for us to talk about policy and the effects that it has on Nebraskans today. And so we have a lot to discuss in this hour. We want it to be really informative so that you know what's happening, and then really giving you just strategies and tools to be able to elevate and use your voice and, influence those around you, whether it's your organization, family, and friends. And so before we get started, I just want to make sure folks understand the legislative process. It is super nuanced. It is not as accessible. And so we want to make sure that as we talk about these policies, you understand how it moves through our state legislature. So as Jill mentioned, these first days were for bill introduction, and that ended yesterday. So there are no more bills that are being introduced. You can also follow along this process with the link in the chat. I can tell you yesterday, 93 bills were introduced just yesterday. So there's a lot that are out there, and on the legislative website, you can see by day how they're introduced as well as the full slate, and you can sort by senator. And so once those bills are introduced, they will be assigned a hearing. At that hearing, that is really an opportunity for folks to testify. Each committee reviews certain bills. So if it falls, into financial pieces, it might go to appropriations, or if it's health and human services related, that committee reviews it, right? So these different committees review the bills based on the intention and the impact that it has. And folks are able to come and give information about those bills, and then those committee members decide if it moves out of committee or not. Bills really move through our legislature if they have what is called a priority, and if that senator prioritizes that bill. So say Senator Terrell McKinney introduces 10 bills, and one of those bills moves out of committee and he prioritizes it, that's the bill that will really have focus. Those others would not, because they're not prioritized. And so once that happens, there are 3 rounds of dialogue and debate around that bill. Amendments may be made. There's a final reading within those 3 rounds, and then it moves to the governor's desk, which then he has the power currently to veto, to not sign or sign. And so follow that link to really understand the process. We wanted to name that for y'all today because there is a lot of things happening in the legislature and it can feel overwhelming. And so we just want to make sure and reiterate that you will not have to fight battles or address, 200 plus bills. We will really, as key partners and as folks that are paid to do this on a daily, will be watching to make sure that we can uplift and say, hey, this bill has made it further. This is where we need energy, or hey, this is where this is. We don't really have to focus on it at that time because it's not a priority. So we will make sure that we are in partnership with you all on that and just making sure that you have full information. So with that, we are going to dive in to talking to our amazing panelists. We first wanted to really start with Andy to just reassure and give insight to people on the current state of abortion access and services. So Andy, would you mind letting the folks know where we are today here in Nebraska?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Ashley. And thank you all for taking some time today to join us. Before we get into all that's happening at the legislature regarding abortion in particular, I just, like Ashley said, want to take a moment to remind and reassure everyone that abortion is still legal and available in the state of Nebraska. One of the goals of people who are opposed to abortion is to create fear and stigma around reproductive and sexual health care and education for that matter. They want folks to be afraid to talk about it and afraid to seek out the care that they need and deserve. And we can't let them do that. You'll learn more in the session about things you can do, but I just, again, wanted to start with that reassurance and reminder to all of you that abortion is still legal in Nebraska. And with that, we know and we'll hear more shortly about the various restrictions and barriers that exist to abortion access. These are things that have been put in place over the years by conservative lawmakers trying to make it harder for folks to access abortion care. But I also want to share some positive stuff, that there are things being done right now to help folks overcome some of those barriers. We'll hear about some of the legislative pieces, but also there's an exciting new resource to share, which is that Nebraska now has an active abortion fund. This is through the nonprofit NEAR, which is Nebraska Abortion Resources, which was started in 2020 by the amazing Chelsea Souder. And they have just recently been able to start accepting applications from patients that need financial support for their abortion care and associated travel and other costs. This is a really exciting new development for abortion access, as we know cost is one of the barriers that many people face. Jill's going to put some links in the chat of ways that you can connect and support this work, like this super awesome swag that they have at Ray Gun right now that helps support their work. I just ordered 2 shirts from there because they're pretty cool. So check that out and just know that there is exciting things being done to give folks greater access to care.
Thank you so much, Andy, for making sure that we are reassured, right, that it's still legal in Nebraska and we have what we need. And so I have the privilege of working alongside both of these folks in the space, but I'm also the board president of ACLU. So y'all are near and dear to my heart. And so I'm excited to bring Scout on to talk about some of the legislative pieces that are happening right now in the legislature. As you all have questions, please drop them in the chat. So I know folks are putting in like where y'all are from and all of that. I'm glad to see who is all in the room. If you have questions about access or anything like that, drop them in the chat and then we'll bring them up as Scout starts to talk about what's happening in the legislature.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. I'm so honored to be here and be a part of this important discussion. So I'm going to start with some of the proactive bills we have. So we have 3 bills at play right now, all 3 introduced by Senator Hunt, one of our amazing champions. She introduced 2 bills this session, and then one was already on file and carried over from last session. And as Andy just mentioned, we have numerous barriers to care. And each of these aims to expand access by removing some of those medically unnecessary barriers to that care. So I'm going to start with LB 715. That one removes the ban on insurance coverage for abortion. So as we know, cost is often one of the greatest barriers people face in accessing any kind of health care, and that includes abortion care. In Nebraska, we have a law where private insurance policies can generally only cover abortion in cases of life endangerment, unless someone would purchase this optional rider at an additional cost. So LB 715 seeks to remove that restriction so that insurance can cover abortion just like any other healthcare, because abortion is healthcare. That has been referred to the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee, and no hearing date has yet been set for that bill. The second one I wanted to cover was LB 716. That modifies provider requirements so that certified nurse midwives, advanced practice registered nurses, and physician assistants can provide abortion care, including medication abortion. So as it is throughout the entire healthcare field, reproductive healthcare providers are in short supply. And we know from decades of research on the safety of abortion, particularly medication abortion, that many aspects of care can safely be done by these other medical providers, not just physicians. So LB 716 has been referred to the HHS committee, but again, no hearing date has been set on that bill. And then the final proactive bill I wanted to cover was LB 276. That had a committee hearing last year. It actually is carried over from last year, and that repeals Nebraska's ban on telemedicine abortion. So right now, Nebraska has a law that requires the physician and the patient to be in the same room when the first pill in that medication abortion regimen is taken, and LB 276 would repeal that. And I also wanted to highlight that it's particularly important right now because just last month, the FDA, many have probably seen that the FDA permanently modified its protocol to remove the requirement that the pill be dispensed in person. However, in Nebraska, and Nebraska is one of 19 states that require the provider to be physically present in the same room. So the FDA's change won't affect or improve patient access to that care. So I just think it's very important to note, because even during the pandemic and even when the in-person dispensing requirement is permanently lifted, Nebraska patients are still forced to not just pick up a medication, but attend this unnecessary in-person appointment to take a pill in front of a provider and meet other requirements well beyond what the FDA requires for safety. So LB 276 would change that. And so that's an overview of 3 proactive bills to remove those unnecessary restrictions on care.
Okay, so we are just going to pause for a moment to see if there are any questions that y'all want to put in the chat or use the Q&A option in this, so that we can make sure that we answer for you all. Okay. If there are any questions, or as you think of things, we are going to move to the bills that we need to oppose and what that looks like. And so again, if you have questions, drop them in, and then after Scout gives us that overview and context, we'll make sure we answer and lift it up so that everyone is really clear and you feel like you are able to navigate what's happening. All right, Scout, go ahead and let us know what's next.
All right, so that was the proactive bills. Now we're going to move to the bans. Briefly, first, I just want to mention that, and many probably know that tomorrow is the 49th anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision. And I think there are 3 key things we need to remember as we honor that anniversary. One, and this is not news, the future of Roe is uncertain at the Supreme Court level. 2, the threat is very real nationally and in Nebraska with these bans that we have proposed just over this first part of this session. And 3, and most importantly, we can stop the abortion bans in Nebraska and not become Texas, but now is the time that we have to act to stop the bans that are in front of us right now. So there are 3 proposed restrictions. These are the biggest threats to abortion in recent history. Unlike in the past, these aren't just a barrier in the path to care. These make it so that there is no path to care. None of these have hearing dates set yet, but all have been referred to the Judiciary Committee. So the first one is LB 781, introduced by Senator Slama, and that bans abortion at about 6 weeks before most people would know they're pregnant. Then the second bill is LB 933 by Senator Albright, and that is what's known as a trigger ban. And that would ban abortion entirely if the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. Well, it purports to say, I guess, if Roe is overturned, abortion is illegal in Nebraska. There are issues, there are many issues with all of these bills from a legal perspective, obviously, but one particular one there is that it's a wrongful delegation of power. It's giving SCOTUS the power to make our laws in Nebraska. So it's giving the judicial branch lawmaking power. And so that's just one procedural issue I wanted to highlight with that bill. And then finally, just a couple of days ago, Senator Geis introduced LB 1036, which would further restrict access to medication abortion care, in addition to that telemedicine ban that we already have that I just talked about. It explicitly restricts medication abortion to physicians only. It bans mailing or delivering pills to anyone other than a physician's office. It limits medication abortion to 9 weeks since the last menstrual period, where the FDA allows up to 10 weeks. It just adds a host of more requirements with respect to in-person examinations, follow-up appointments, reporting, and then a violation of that would be a felony. So those are the 3 bans that we are facing in the legislature right now.
Thank you, Scout, for going over this. So again, I want to pause, and if folks have any questions about any of our proactive legislation that Senator Hunt introduced and the advocacy around that, and then any of the bills that were introduced that we are looking at opposing.
Oh, and I just wanted to highlight, did I say the wrong number for that last one? I'm so sorry, 1086, is that right?
Yep, you're good.
1086, sorry, so many numbers.
I know.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
You're fine. I think one thing to note as folks are thinking about questions, we talked about this morning. So, we have efforts as individual groups and as organizations that are working in the same space. And it feels a little bit like the world is on fire, right? Like outside of these policies, there are adjacent policies that attack our civil liberties, that limit spaces for folks of color and queer folks, like all of these things, right? And so how do we really provide care for each other in this space, and then really leverage our voice and our collective power in a way that creates the environment in which we want to live in Nebraska. And so know that as we are navigating these things, like we understand the nuance and complexity of this space, and we want y'all to make space for that too, as well as like, how do we move forward? So these are great questions. We actually will talk about in just a few around ways that you can advocate and use your voice. Y'all are ready for action today. Y'all like, cut the shit, like, let's get to it. I love it. And then what can volunteers do? So with that, like, let's talk to our audience. We will go over some ways in which you can get engaged. So Scout, can you maybe talk to what contacting your senator looks like and some of the action forms that ACLU has around that senator piece?
Yes, we have a contact your senator page. I guess it's an action form that folks can fill out that allows them to find their state senator and email their state senator right from there. And we're encouraging folks to include that we don't want any bans. None of those bills are acceptable to us in Nebraska. And then we also have a opportunity to get postcards and write postcards to senators, give them to your friends and neighbors to write postcards to your senators to tell them that we are not going to stand for any of these bans.
Thank you. So yes, one of the major call to actions is to contact your senator. So this is really important. So make sure, because you are their constituent, you're reaching out to your senator, you're saying, hey, support these proactive bills. This is the environment that I want to see in Nebraska, and we oppose these. Both on Ivy Black Girl and Women's Fund sites, there are some kind of templates and toolkits around like, how do you start to reach out? So like, what does a letter even look like to your senator? What should you include? There are some tips in there so that you can craft and really tell your story. I mean, because that's important, right? Like, we want folks and the senators that we elected to be there to really uphold what we're saying, and we can do that through storytelling. And so make sure that you check those out to help you craft your story. Another major call to action is literally leaving comments on the new online system that was implemented last year for the state legislature. So Andy, could you talk to how folks can utilize leaving comments and what that process is like?
Yes. I also, just going back for just a second, wanted to mention and just remind folks too, that if you have a supportive senator, reach out to them also. Thank them for their support, encourage them, support them. They're going to have a pretty big fight ahead of them at the legislature, and anything we can do to say thank you to them for their work and their support, I think, is helpful too. So I get that question a lot of like, well, my senator is supportive. What's the point? Thank them. So online comments. So now,
hold on, Andy.
Go,
There's a question I think is relevant to what you said.
Yeah.
On the opposite spectrum of things. Kathy says, is it even worth it to contact my senator if I know she is staunchly pro-life? Or maybe who else they could contact if they know that about their senator?
I think it's worth contacting your senator, even if you know they're opposed. I think they need to hear from all of us. So I know sometimes it's really challenging, and sometimes they're not particularly nice to folks that don't agree with their perspectives. And I apologize for that. I don't want folks to get put in a position where they're having to deal with someone that isn't nice. But if you feel comfortable, I would still reach out. They still need to hear from us. As we keep moving through the process too, again, as we've said, this is going to happen over the coming months, and there will be different actions along the way, different folks that we may ask you to contact, things like that. Right now it is pretty specific to your senator, so that's what we ask right now, but there will be some other ways that you can get in contact with other folks in the future. So hopefully that helps answer that question. Okay, so online comments. The Women's Fund has a resource that they are going to post here that kind of shows you what it looks like in the Nebraska legislature webpage to put comments in. A lot of the ones that we are opposing and supporting don't have that button up yet, or we would show you, or maybe they do, and Ashley's going to show us.
Well, I was going to show for one that it is up.
Great.
So I was going to take
Great.
them to 9:29.
Perfect. Do it. So this is something new that the legislature introduced last year, in part because of the pandemic, but they've kept it in place as well so that folks can submit comments online and not have to come in person to the legislature. So go ahead, Ashley, you want to?
Yep, so you search up here at the top, and I'm on the homepage of the Nebraska legislature. So you can see all the information, and then I just put in the bill number here. And then where it says submit comments for online. So this bill has a hearing, and so that's why this is up now. So then I can click this link. There's some things that you have to say, like you understand what this means by submitting online and as part of the legislative process. And then you can include your hearing in the hearing record. We want to say yes. So we want this to be included in the hearing record. And then you fill out all of your information here. You will have to have an email address in order to submit a comment, because once you submit this, it will have you verify that that is the correct email afterwards. So you'll fill that out. You'll put in your email. You will put your district in here, and this is a space to find your district. If you are, say, like a registered lobbyist and you're working on behalf of an organization, like if I was filling this out on behalf of IB Black Girl as a lobbyist, I would then put that 0 in there, and that's what these instructions are saying. But most folks on the call will do this as individuals, right? You put who you're representing. This is your stance. You are either for it, against it, or neutral. And then this is where your written statement goes. It is 500 words, so it may be easier to write it like in a Google Doc or Microsoft Word document, edit it, make sure that you have it how you want, and then post it. And then you will click I am not a robot and submit. And that's that place where you go to check your email to get the notification. You'll hit confirm, like I am the person I said, and yes, I want to submit this. And then your comment is recorded.
The one thing I would add is that these are, if in order for them to be part of the public record, they do need to be submitted by noon the day before the hearing. So the bill that you just used as an example, Ashley, they would need to be in by noon on Monday because the hearing is on Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So just so you know, there is a time limit to it. So it has to be noon the day before the
Yeah. And then you can also put, if you want just general comments about the bill, you can also put general comments that won't go into kind of the hearing record. But I think in terms of what has impact, yes, the comments help in general, but we really want to make sure that they are part of that hearing record and are considered as these bills are coming up, whether we're for that bill or if we are against that bill. And then there is a question, is your address included in the public record since it's submitted with the comments? I have not seen that my address comes up searchable. I think it's to verify. So I have not seen it when I personally submitted in the information or what I can find from the Nebraska legislature. Your name and your district though do come up.
Yep, it's the statement and the name that are included, but not the.
Great question. Any other questions or thoughts that folks have on what we've shared so far before we give you a few more tips?
There are 2 more in the Q&A. For somebody who doesn't reside in the state but has a vested interest in what's going on, what's the best course for contacting committee members?
Any thoughts there, Andy or Scout?
I would say this, you may not have a specific senator, but I think definitely if you have a vested interest, follow that procedure to submit your comment. I think it's really important, especially when the legislators are always talking about losing Nebraskans to other states. Maybe some of our restrictive policies had something to do with that. In your case, maybe not. But also I think maybe highlighting, like, if your state you live in now has different policies that are more accessible for people and how that plays out, I think that would be something that would be good to hear too. That's just my thoughts.
Andy, anything else to add to that question?
I would just, again, the reminder, keep following all of these organizations that are working on this. And as we progress, there will be additional folks that we can contact. Right now, again, we're trying to get folks to focus in on the people they are constituents for, but later in the process, that won't be as much of a factor. And we'll be asking folks to contact a variety of senators. So.
And one thing just to add, that portal that you submit those comments, that should get your comments to all the senators on the committee. So you don't need to worry about emailing them separately. It should go to everyone that's on that committee.
Absolutely. So our next question is around any tips for senators. for talking points and how they can be encouraged and what they can do as their colleagues may oppose their stance and are trying to attack them about abortion rights and access.
So I think it's still beneficial to reach out to these folks. I think one of the things that we find tends to resonate with people is focusing on values. Like, why is abortion, what values do you hold that make abortion access something that you care about? And talk to your senator about those values, because oftentimes they're shared. You know, they likely hold some similar values to you. So use that kind of values-based messaging and communication with folks, as opposed to focusing too specifically on the specifics of the bills. That might be one approach that could work. Again, you know, you're probably not going to change their mind, but they still need to hear from you. They still need to know that there are a lot of people in Nebraska that don't want these bills. The majority, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And if you are in a public office or have proximity to someone that is an elected official that is navigating that, please reach out to one of our organizations so that we can connect you to some resources around, again, talking points and really feeling comfortable of how they navigate that kind of climate. And then for the links that we have dropped in this chat, will these be available for folks that cannot grab them now, that are currently like listening in through a mobile device?
Yeah, the Women's Fund will send a post event email with all the important links and the reminders of action steps for people to take during their lovely weekend.
Okay, awesome. And then one of our last call to actions, which you kind of touched on, Andy, was around social media. So how can people leverage like their social influence to really push and raise awareness around what needs to happen? So would you mind starting to speak to that, since you kind of already touched on it?
Sure. I think, again, I think as much as we can raise awareness and understanding within our networks and our circles about what truly is at stake here, and what the threats are, and educate each other about it. I think we were just talking about this morning, that so many of us have never lived in a society where abortion access was not legal. So it's hard to imagine that it really truly is as threatened right now as it is. So continuing to raise awareness and raise and educate folks about what's at stake, and what the attacks really are, I think is a really helpful way that folks can get involved. So one of the links that we just plugged in, we all kind of have a variety of different social media toolkits that you can use. So take your pick. Ivy Black Girl has one there that you can talk about, Ashley. Women's Fund has one. ACLU has one. The Planned Parenthood one. It's just some pretty basic graphics and suggestions of posts that you can use in various social media to raise awareness.
Mm-hmm. And then lastly, as you think about other call to actions, could be letters to the editor. So if you wanted to write a letter to the editor, opposing any sort of ban and really pushing that Nebraska needs to have reproductive access, which includes access to abortions as part of healthcare. That is also, again, another way to leverage a media outlet to uplift your voice and to make sure that they are representing, right, all the views that are here and what people are wanting. So you have kind of 4 call to actions, right? Letters to the editors, contacting your senator, doing some postcards, social media, coming down to testify, leaving comments. So there are many different outlets, again, to use your voice and to organize. I would start to think about what is your sphere of influence and where do you want to start that work? And then really follow along our different organizations, publications, because it'll help you right size your work. Again, there is a lot of stuff happening in the legislature. There are a lot of attacks on the things that we know are important to Nebraska. And so we want to make sure that we can leverage our energy and our resources in a way that we see movement. And so we're not fighting all of these bills at once. that won't be the process, and we can really help to organize your activities and your energy. So please subscribe to our newsletters. Please follow us on social media, and that will give you really more concrete ways to engage in what's timely and what's being prioritized. Are there any other questions? I want to pause to make sure that we get any other questions that are here.
Ashley, you had talked about the committee hearings, and so some of the bills have been introduced, but the specific bills we mentioned today don't have committee hearings yet. What's kind of the process for knowing when those committee hearings happen?
Scout, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So it's not going to be sometimes a really long time in advance, but I mean, advocates like us, we check them every single day. So, so we'll be the first to know. We have people at the Capitol who know right away when those hearings will be, and we'll get that out to you as soon as possible. And unfortunately, it has to be within 7 to 10 days notice, but sometimes it's not much more than that. And these hearings we know are, smack dab in the middle of a work day, which makes them inaccessible for a lot of people. But working with that, once we know, as soon as we know, we will get those dates out. And along with that, those 3 bills, the bans will likely be in a hearing together in one day, but then the proactive bills that we mentioned, the 715, the 716, are in different committees. And so those all won't necessarily be on the same day, but we will get those dates out as soon as we know.
Yeah. And then there is a resource that Abby mentioned in the comment that people can use a free bill tracker system to get updates on up to 15 bills. Yes. And so that can also be an option for people that want to follow along as well. Any other questions or thoughts before we turn it over to the Women's Fund to talk about other pieces of adjacent legislation that absolutely affect reproductive access?
One more question about lobby days.
Okay, are there going to be any organized lobby days for any of your groups?
Yes, we are getting our registration form ready for Planned Parenthood. We will be holding lobby day a little bit differently this year in light of the ongoing pandemic and trying to do what we can in person safely. But we will be holding events the week of March 8th. We will have a virtual kind of training process first, so anyone can join that. And then we'll have 2 different options of when folks can actually come down to the Capitol and lobby their senators. One will be on Wednesday afternoon, March 9th, and then the other one will be on Friday morning, March 11th. So trying to create multiple options so we don't have quite as many people all together in one place. But keep an eye out on our website and social media and everything for more details, but those are the dates.
Scout, did you have anything to add to the lobby day?
We don't have any specific lobby days, but with all the threats going on this session, every day is a lobby day, right? Unfortunately, like.
Yeah, that's true. And same for us. What we are asking people to do, we send out call to actions in our newsletter as things come up. And so, like, for instance, the bill that I showed you is 929. That would expand postpartum coverage from 60 days to 12 months. So if someone chooses to give birth and parent, that's important for that resource to be there. So we send out a call to action for folks to leave comments. when to come to the Capitol for the hearing. And we'll try to bite size ours in that way as it relates just from a capacity standpoint. And then we'll have some virtual opportunities to learn more about reproductive freedom and what does that mean at the intersection of race and gender that we're offering through our social platforms. And so I think, every organization is taking a different approach, which is great, which means that there are tons of ways to engage. And so please just make sure that you're following us, again, subscribing and all of that. So if you want to participate in a lobby day, you have those options. If you want to do a virtual event, you got that. If you need to submit a comment, right? Like we want to meet people where they are and what their advocacy looks like. Well, we appreciate folks diving in with us today. Like, as we said, it's been a whirlwind of the beginning of this legislative session, and really just encourage you all to maintain a place of like being grounded, right, and taking care of yourself. Like after every meeting, I'm like, drink your water, like hydrate, like get some rest, because this work can be at the consequence of us, especially as we are navigating the world, right, as people that have direct impacts from what's happening to us, as well as advocates in the space. And so we want to make sure that we're taking care of our whole selves as we are doing this. And so thank you for your time on the reproductive access side. I'm excited to kick it back to Jill, who's going to talk about some other key pieces of work and legislation that also affect us here in Nebraska. So with that, Jill.
Thank you, Ashley, Andy, and Scout. I appreciate your time and advocacy on this issue, and of course your partnership as well. One of the things I wanted to mention, as you know, the Women's Fund, we care very much about access to sex education as well. And it's really a cross section of what we just talked about with reproductive health care and access, but also what we're going to be talking about with freedom from violence. We know that sex education is sexual violence prevention. So this is the exact cross section of these two issues for us at the Women's Fund. There is a bill that we would oppose this session, LB 768, that would prohibit the State Board of Education from enacting comprehensive health education. We know that is what is most effective when it's complete and inclusive for all young people. So we will be opposing that. Bill 768. There's also another one, 1077, which would censor discussions around race and gender in public schools and really silence those conversations and letting young people be who they are. So I'm going to put that one in the chat as well. Again, we'll have more specific actions to come on these really sex education and open opportunities for discussion bills. But know that we're always going to be in a space of advocating for comprehensive and inclusive sex education so that our young people can lead healthy lives and that we can work toward preventing sexual violence. We do have more information about how sex education helps young people. So I'm putting that in the chat now. And then I'm going to turn it over to a team member of ours at the Women's Fund, Nick Zadina, to talk about our work in the freedom from violence policy land. Nick, take it away.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you all for being here today. A special shout out to Ashley and Scout and Andy for the information today. I learned a lot. Thank you for taking your time today. I'm really excited to be here. This is my first public appearance as a member of the Women's Fund. I am the Freedom from Violence Coordinator, and I'm so thrilled to be a part of this team of change makers. So thank you for being here today. Let's talk about some of the bills that are going on. So there's 4 bills that I would like to talk about today, and we're going to do an overview of each of them. One of the bills that I'm going to talk about is a carryover bill from last year, and then the other 3 are newly introduced this year. So as I'm talking about these bills, we're going to be putting some stuff in the chat so you can read all of the information on the bill. So as I'm speaking, feel free to click on those and check it out. I only have a few minutes here, so I'm not going to go into great detail on these. I will do my best to answer any questions that you may have, time permitting. At the end of the presentation, I am going to be sharing my email address. If people have questions for me or want to talk about how can I get involved or what does this mean, hit me up. I am more than happy to talk with any of you. So first bill I want to talk about, this is LB 118, and this is a carryover from last year introduced by Senator Moorfeld. Senator Moorfeld is introducing a bill that's talking about protection orders. Protection orders are an extremely important tool for survivors of domestic violence to be able to keep themselves safe. They're not magic, but they are important, and it can be confusing because there's protection orders, restraining orders, no contact orders. Protection orders are the ones with the clout. They're the ones that matter. We know they work. Studies have shown that 80% 30% reduction in police reported physical violence after protection orders are put in place. What we are trying to do with this bill is currently the way protection orders work in Nebraska is they last for 1 year. 1 year is not long enough. We would like this to be extended. This bill is proposing that it goes from 1 year to 5 years. The majority of states, we know in 27 other states, they allow for longer protection orders. 6 states allow for lifelong protection orders, which I think is really awesome. So we want to extend that time frame. Another reason that extending this time frame is important, not just for survivors, it also helps our system. We know that just in Douglas County, there are 300 submissions for protection orders that are just repeat protection orders involving the same 2 people from the previous year. That is putting a strain on our judicial system that we do not need. So we want to extend the time that they last to protect survivors longer and to ease up on the judicial system a little bit, so they're not having to see these things all the time. The other thing that is introduced in this bill that's really important is in the way things are now, these protection orders require a notary. That is a problem because it takes time to find a notary. And a lot of times these protection orders need to happen fast. Protection orders often come about when domestic violence is at its most dangerous, which is when a survivor is deciding to leave. And when that happens, things need to happen fast because that loss of control from the offender, that's when they'll resort to other tactics. And finding a notary shouldn't be on the list of things to do. So this bill will also work to change that. So this is one, like I said, that is a carryover from last year, and be on the lookout for it, support it. The next bill, this is LB 772. This is to protect survivors from debt collection. So this is introduced by Senator Day, and this is going to prevent healthcare providers from referring medical bills to collections agencies. Okay, we believe that just because somebody is sexually assaulted, they should not have to fall into the collection system. And a bunch of hospitals, or a few hospitals, already follow this policy and procedure. This is just to make sure that everybody follows this policy and procedure. We also know that 44% of sexual assault victims do end up spending 1 or more nights in the hospital. And we also all know that that is not cheap. So we do not want being sent to collections to make it prohibitive for survivors of sexual assault to get the care that they need. So this is a really important bill that is being introduced by Senator Day. It's 772. Check it out. The next bill to talk about is LB 1009. This is the death review team bill. This is being introduced by Senator Brandt. And this bill came about because there are domestic violence deaths every year in Nebraska. And this bill is to introduce a team that will review these deaths and will evaluate these domestic abuse related fatalities and then develop recommendations with the goal of preventing future deaths. So a couple of families who have lost loved ones are the ones who brought this bill forward. From 2012 to 2020, Nebraska saw 127 domestic violence related deaths. You can't solve a problem unless you talk about it. This is going to allow the people who are closest to these systems and closest to these investigations and people who have lived experience to talk about these cases and see what is going on with these deaths. We need to know if there are things that we could do to prevent these deaths from occurring. Nebraska is one of only 9 states that does not have a domestic violence death review team. And I think it's time that we have one. We have a child death review team. We have a maternal death review team. We know the process. We just need to implement it. So we are in favor of this. It's also going to help us identify vulnerable populations. For example, nationally, we know that Native American communities are more likely to experience domestic violence. And if there is services that we need to fill some gaps in there, we need to know that. This team is going to let us take a look at what is happening in Nebraska and then make recommendations so that we can do something about it. So very important. If you have questions, one of the main questions I get when I talk about this bill is who is on this team. Click on the link. It's in the bill, but I'm not going to go over all of it now because it's quite a few people. The last bill that I want to talk about today is LB 1246. This is being introduced by Senator Pransing Brooks, and this is about anonymity of survivors. So let's say that somebody is sexually assaulted and they decide to make a report to law enforcement. Law enforcement, one of the things they're going to do is they're going to make an incident report. And this incident report is going to be submitted, and it is a public record. So this is a document that the public can access, and that victim's name is going to be in that record. We don't think it should be in that record. And the reason that we think that is because of lots of reasons. So number one, when survivors' identities are known, it leaves them vulnerable for more harm. So for example, if somebody is sex trafficked and there is an incident report and somehow the sex trafficker or somebody connected to the sex trafficker sees the incident report, that information could be shared. We also know that one of the things that happens, it's common for somebody who is sexually assaulted or trafficked to contact law enforcement, and then less than 24 hours after that, they have media contacting them because the media looks through the incident reports. And that's overwhelming and scary to have the media calling you about this thing that just happened or maybe that you just reported. And not only is that bad for survivors, it is not great for the investigative process either, because the fewer people they talk to, the better the integrity of the investigation will be. So this survivor anonymity bill is really designed to protect the identifying information of these victims. The other important part of this bill, and the reason I think this one is very important, is because survivors talk to each other, people know, and one of the reasons that they might not choose to make a report is because they know that their name is going to get released in this public documentation. And we don't want that to be a reason that somebody might not report something that they might otherwise report. We want to give them all of the options to do what they need to do. So those are the four bills that we're really looking at and pushing forward. Are there any questions, Jill, or has anything come up that I've missing?
There's one in the Q&A and one in the chat.
Thank you.
The chat question is about 772 and debt collections, and that it includes child abuse and domestic abuse.
Thank you.
Correct?
Yes.
And
yes.
then a second part of that, would it protect against the victim or their guardian or family from also getting sent to collections?
Yes, it would. Yes, it is. That is written into the bill as well. Yep.
And then Q&A is the discussion around survivors and the appreciation of that discussion. And also, is there a possibility to ensure rape kit testing backlog is brought current? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yep. So that's been a big topic of conversation at the legislation as they've been dealing with the DNA conversation that has been come up with. I can't remember the senator's bill, but that bill. Last I heard, they're about 50% through the backlog, and they are on track. And all the current stuff that's going on with legislation is not going to negatively impact the backlog of the rape kits that have not been tested.
Because that work has already started outside.
That work has already been started. It's outside. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
It is started and it is rolling. And yeah, and the current legislation that they're proposing, the backlogs will continue to be processed.
Those are the two questions I see. Are there any more questions for Nick on our work to support survivors through public policy? I'm not seeing any question. Nick, we'll put your email in the chat if people do have questions. Oh, Cindy is asking, how far back do untested kits go right now?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the ins and outs of that project. If you would like to email me that question, I can check in and see if I can find that information for you.
All right, Nick, thank you for your time. Just a few closing thoughts and some additional calls to action. Actually, I'm going to share my screen one more time so that you can all see some of these reminders of call to actions. I would just say that the patriarchy and the system that we live in is dependent on you remaining silent, so don't get complacent. We need your voice. This is definitely the time to speak up on issues you care about and to ensure that your elected official is working for you. There's a lot of discussion of what if my senator, I already know they're not supportive, or they are. Doesn't matter. This is the time. We cannot be silent or quiet or polite anymore. We need to ask for what we want and to use our voices in those ways. It is a time for working toward the freedom and liberation of all people. And we're so excited to have your advocacy and your voices in this world and in the state with us. Of course, there are a lot of calls to actions that we could all be doing. So make sure that you're signed up for our emails and action alerts if you aren't already. Get inspired by that Power Hour playlist. I would say it's a great list to be looking at and to be having on in the background while you're doing all of these online comments. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. We do alerts that way too, especially when there's a quick turnaround or we need to contact a specific senator or committee, or maybe even just we need to get people to committee hearings. We'll be using social media in that way as well. If there are any other questions, we can stay on for a little bit. We appreciate you again for being here, and we'll send a follow-up email pretty soon after. Thank you all so much for your time. Just finding my playlist now.